The fleet carrying Varys, Daenerys, Jon Snow, and their combined forces, unsullied Valyrian troops and Dothraki, arrived at Astapor to an unwelcome sight. The city, once liberated by Daenerys and her forces, was now in turmoil. Smoke rose from sections of the city, and the banners of rebellious factions flew above the streets. The Masters, thought to have been crushed, had seized the opportunity during Daenerys' absence to spark an insurrection, rallying remnants of their supporters to retake the city. As the fleet docked, Varys surveyed the chaos with a calm but calculating expression. Turning to Ser Jorah Mormont, who stood nearby, he issued his orders with precision. "Take my elite Valyrian troops and flood the city. Root out the insurrectionists and secure the streets. Let the Unsullied hold key points while the Dothraki drive the remaining rebels into the open." Jorah nodded, his expression grim. "And if we capture the insurrectionists alive, what then?" Varys glanced at Daenerys, allowing her to answer. She stepped forward, her presence commanding, her violet eyes alight with resolve. "They bend the knee or they burn." Jon Snow, standing nearby, frowned deeply at her words. "Is there no other way?" he interjected, his tone measured but firm. "Not all of them may be loyal to the Masters. Killing them all doesn't solve anything. It breeds resentment." Daenerys turned to Jon, her gaze softening slightly but her tone unwavering. "There is much you still have to learn of our ways, Lord Snow. Mercy for those who oppose me would be seen as weakness. Weakness invites rebellion. This city must see strength, or it will never truly be free." Jon's expression tightened, his discomfort clear, but he said nothing more. He glanced at Varys, whose fiery eyes flickered with intrigue as he watched the exchange. Finally, Varys spoke, his voice calm but laced with authority. "The East does not yield to kindness, Jon Snow. It yields to fire. Daenerys speaks the truth. Control must be absolute. But," he paused, his gaze narrowing, "there is another matter that demands immediate attention." Turning back to Daenerys, he continued, "Your dragons must return. We will construct a great dragon pit here in Astapor to house them. They are your strength, your symbol of power, and they will ensure no rebellion dares rise again." Daenerys nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Summon them. Let the world see the might of House Targaryen once more." Jorah, preparing to lead the assault, asked Daenerys, "And the construction of the dragon pit? How will it be secured amidst this rebellion?" Varys stepped forward. "Leave that to me. My fire priests and Valyrian engineers will oversee its construction. But first, the city must be brought to heel." The orders were given, and the elite Valyrian troops, led by Jorah, marched into the city alongside the Unsullied and Dothraki. The streets erupted into chaos as the forces of Daenerys clashed with the insurrectionists. Rebellious banners were torn down, and the remnants of the Masters were driven into hiding. The Valyrian troops, ruthless and efficient, worked in tandem with the Unsullied to secure strongholds and round up those responsible for the rebellion. Throughout the operation, Jon Snow moved among the ranks, observing the brutal efficiency of the forces under Daenerys' command. He watched as prisoners were brought before her, some defiant, others trembling. True to her word, Daenerys gave them a choice: bend the knee or burn. Many chose submission, their rebellion extinguished by fear, while others met their end in the fiery judgment of the Dragon Queen. Later that evening, as the fires of the rebellion died down and the city began to calm, Jon approached Daenerys in her tent. "Is this the future you envision?" he asked, his voice calm but questioning. "A world ruled by fear?" Daenerys looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "A world ruled by strength, Jon. Fear is a tool, but so is loyalty. Those who bend the knee will know my justice as well as my mercy. But rebellions like this, they cannot be allowed to grow." Varys entered the tent then, his presence commanding as always. "The city is secure," he announced. "The dragon pit will begin construction immediately, and when your dragons return, Daenerys Stormborn, no one will dare challenge your rule." Daenerys inclined her head. "Good. The Masters of Meereen will be next." We will end the slavers of the East, root and stem." Jon looked between the two of them, his discomfort growing. The bond between Daenerys and Varros, their shared vision of fire and domination, was evident. And though he understood their resolve, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what it would mean for the world they sought to build. For now, the rebellion in Astapor was quelled, but Jon Snow knew that the battles ahead would test not just their strength, but their humanity. Varros strode into the grand palace of Astapor, the remnants of the day's conquest clinging to him like a shroud. His laughter echoed through the expansive halls, a sound that was both unsettling and triumphant, as though the hunting of insurrectionists had been nothing more than a casual game to him. His servants scurried away, sensing the weight of his mood, while others worked to complete their task. A massive map of Essos, painstakingly painted across the floor of the palace's grand hall. The intricate details of the free cities, the slave ports, and the far-reaching expanses of the continent shimmered in the firelight. Standing at the center of the map, Varros gestured for Daenerys to join him. His fiery eyes burned with a zeal that was both awe-inspiring and unnerving. "The next plan," he began, his voice carrying a strange mixture of reverence and command, "is clear. The Lord of Light has shown me what must be done." Daenerys approached cautiously, her violet eyes narrowing as she listened. "And what does the fire tell you, Varros?" Varros turned to face her fully, his expression intense. "It tells me this: we will unify Essos. We will burn away slavery from the free cities and establish the might of Valyria upon this continent once more. The Lord of Light wills it." He gestured to the map with a sweeping motion, his voice rising with fervor. "Bravos, Lorith, Lys, Myr, Norvos, Pentos, Qohor, Tyrosh, Volantis. Every city will bend the knee. Those that do not will face the fury of Dragonfire. We will raise legions, Daenerys. Not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. A force of no less than 250,000 soldiers, all loyal to the cause of the new Valyrian freehold." Daenerys stood stunned, her gaze darting between Varros and the massive map on the floor. This was your plan all along?" she asked, her voice quiet but edged with disbelief. Varros inclined his head slightly, his smirk unapologetic. "Yes, the Lord of Light wills the conquest of Essos, the destruction of the slavers, and the return of this continent to the old ways. It is not merely a conquest, it is a cleansing, a rebirth." From the corner of the room, Jon Snow stood in shock, his brow furrowed as he absorbed Varros's words. The sheer scale of the plan, the ambition, and the ruthlessness it required left him momentarily speechless. He stepped forward as if to object, but before he could speak, Varros motioned for both him and Daenerys to follow him. "We need privacy," Varros said sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. He led them into an adjoining chamber, shutting the doors firmly behind them. The tension in the room was palpable as Varros turned to face them, his fiery eyes locking onto Jon. "You," Varros began, pointing at Jon, his voice low but piercing. "Who was your real father?" Jon stiffened, taken aback by the question. "My real father?" he repeated. "Eddard Stark raised me. He is my father." Varros stepped closer, his fiery gaze narrowing. "No, Jon Snow. Eddard Stark raised you, but your blood is Valyrian. Scourge would not have obeyed you, would not have bonded with you, if you were merely a Stark. Dragons do not yield to anyone but their kin. And you are kin." Daenerys' eyes widened, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" Varros' tone grew softer, though no less intense. "Jon Snow, you are of Valyrian blood. Somewhere in your lineage, perhaps even directly, the Targaryen line flows through you. That is why Scourge obeyed. That is why you are here." Jon looked between Varros and Daenerys, his thoughts racing. That can't be," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've been a Stark all my life." Varros stepped back, his smirk returning. "The truth of your bloodline will reveal itself in time. But know this, Jon Snow, you are not just a piece on the board. You are part of the fire, and fire fire reshapes the world. Daenerys turned to Jon, her expression a mixture of shock and understanding. If what he says is true, she began, her words trailing off as the weight of the revelation settled. Jon shook his head, his voice firm. I am a Stark. Whatever my blood, I was raised in the North. I fight for the North. Varros laughed lightly, his tone almost mocking. You fight for the living, Jon Snow, and the living need fire to survive. You cannot deny what you are. Not anymore. The room fell silent, the tension thick as Varros's words lingered. The revelation, whether fully understood or not, had set the stage for something far greater. For Jon, for Daenerys, and for Varros, the path ahead was clear. Essos would burn, and the world would be reborn in fire and blood. The war room of the Astapor Palace was alive with activity. Varros, standing at the head of a massive table adorned with maps and markers, addressed a group of commanders with the intensity of a storm. Daenerys Targaryen sat silently in a high-backed chair near the corner of the room, her violet eyes watchful. The weight of the moment was evident, as the plans for the conquest of Yunkai and Meereen were about to be laid bare. Unsullied captains, their stoic faces betraying no emotion, stood to one side. Opposite them were Valyrian commanders, their fiery armor and fierce expressions a sharp contrast to the Unsullied's disciplined calm. Dothraki calls lingered at the edges of the room, their restless energy palpable as they awaited the promise of war. Varros began, his fiery eyes scanning the room. The conquest of Yunkai and Meereen is not merely a military objective, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. It is the next step in the unification of Essos. These cities represent the last vestiges of the slavers' power in this region. We will burn their influence to ash and ensure their chains never bind another. He motioned to the map on the table, where markers representing Unsullied, Valyrian troops, and Dothraki surrounded the cities of Yunkai and Meereen. Yunkai will fall first. Its defenses are weaker, and its rulers lack the resolve to withstand a full assault. Pointing to a section of the map marked as Yunkai's southern gates, Varros continued. The Unsullied will lead the assault here. Their discipline will break through the city's walls, and once inside, they will secure key points, barracks, armories, and the homes of the slaver elite. An Unsullied commander stepped forward and saluted, his voice sharp and efficient. It will be done, Commander Varros. Varros nodded, then turned his attention to the Dothraki. The Dothraki will strike from the eastern plains. You will circle the city, burning their outlying farms and destroying their supply lines. Let them fear you, but do not waste lives in reckless charges. We want the slavers to collapse from within. One of the Khals grinned, his bloodlust barely restrained. They will see their city burn before they die. Finally, Varros pointed to a marker for the Valyrian forces, positioned to the northwest of the city. The Valyrian troops will hold the high ground outside the city. You will cut off any retreat and ensure no reinforcements reach Yunkai. Once the Unsullied and Dothraki secure the city, you will sweep through and eliminate any remaining resistance. A Valyrian commander saluted sharply. As you command. Daenerys, though silent, watched with growing unease. Her gaze shifted between the commanders and the map, her mind weighing the cost of the campaign ahead. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. And what of the people of Yunkai? The slaves? The innocents caught in the crossfire? Varros turned to her, his tone softening slightly. The slaves will be freed, Daenerys, as they were in Astapor. The innocents will be spared wherever possible. But war is not without sacrifice. If we are to end the slavers' reign, we must act decisively. She nodded but said nothing more, her thoughts clearly still churning. Varros continued, his attention shifting to the next objective. Once Yunkai is secured, we move on to Meereen. This city will not fall as easily. Its walls are higher, its defenses stronger, and its rulers more cunning. They have prepared for war, and they will use their slaves as shields to protect themselves. Pointing to the river that flowed near Meereen, Varros outlined his plan. We will divide our forces. The Unsullied will march to the city's western gates. while the Dothraki and Valyrian troops attack from the eastern plains. Meanwhile, I will lead a small strike force up the river under the cover of night. We will infiltrate the city and cut the head from the snake, the slaver leaders. The room grew quiet as the weight of the plan settled over the commanders. The precision of the strategy, coupled with the ruthlessness it required, left no room for doubt about the outcome. Daenerys broke the silence, her voice steady but questioning. "And what of my dragons?" Varros smiled faintly, his fiery eyes glinting. "Your dragons will strike when the time is right. They are your greatest weapon, Daenerys, and we will use them to remind the slavers of what true power looks like. But they will not be risked needlessly." Jon Snow, standing near the edge of the room, finally spoke. "And if they resist? If they fight to the death?" Varros turned to Jon, his expression unwavering. "Then they will burn. Slavery must be eradicated. And if it takes fire to cleanse the East, so be it." Jon frowned but said nothing, his unease clear. The room, however, buzzed with anticipation. The commanders saluted, their resolve hardened, and the meeting concluded. The conquest of Yunkai and Meereen was set in motion, the next step in a campaign that would reshape Essos, and perhaps the world, forever. In the grand chamber of the Astapor Palace, Varros stood at the head of the war council, his fiery eyes scanning the gathered commanders and advisors. The map of Essos sprawled across the floor before them, now marked with the progress and ambitions of Daenerys' growing empire. Jon Snow was notably absent, having been sent on an inspection of the troops and defenses outside the city, a deliberate move by Varros and Daenerys to keep this part of the discussion away from his ears. Varros raised a hand, calling for silence. The room, filled with unsullied commanders, Dothraki khals, Valyrian officers, and a select few of Daenerys' trusted advisors, grew quiet as they awaited his words. "Yunkai and Meereen," Varros began, his voice carrying the weight of conviction, "are not merely cities, they are the foundation. When we take them, we will free their people as we did here in Astapor. But more than that, we will use their resources and their strength to raise legions. From these cities, we will form the core of an army that will be unmatched in both size and discipline." He gestured to the cities marked on the map, his fiery blade tracing a path from Slaver's Bay to the free cities. "These two cities will give us the men and resources we need to launch our campaign across Essos. We will march on the free cities, one by one, until every slaver's whip is broken, every chain shattered." The room murmured in agreement, the assembled leaders nodding at the clarity and scale of his vision. Daenerys, seated at the head of the table, watched him carefully, her expression a mixture of concern and intrigue. Varros turned to her, his tone softening but remaining firm. "Do not worry about Westeros, Daenerys. Not yet. Once we conquer Essos and unite the continent under your banner, you will have the strength to take Westeros 10 times over. The 7 kingdoms will fall like dry leaves before the might of a unified Essos. But for now, the focus must remain here." Daenerys leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but questioning. "And if Westeros sees our power growing? If they act against us before we're ready?" Varros smiled faintly, his fiery eyes narrowing. "Let them see. Let them fear. The dragons alone are enough to keep the 7 kingdoms cautious. And should they dare to act, the fires of Valyria will remind them why they should not." One of the Valyrian commanders stepped forward, bowing his head. "Commander Varros speaks true. The strength of the free cities, when combined with the dragons and the legions we will raise, will make us unstoppable. Let the 7 kingdoms tremble if they wish. It will only make their eventual conquest sweeter." The room murmured in agreement again, the resolve among the leaders growing. Daenerys, still watching Varros closely, finally allowed a small nod. "If Essos must be unified to ensure victory, then so be it. But remember this, Varros, we do not conquer for the sake of conquest. We fight to free the oppressed." Varros inclined his head, his tone respectful but unwavering. "Of course, Daenerys. This is the will of the Lord of Light, to free the slaves, to cleanse the East of its chains, and to restore balance to the world." His words seemed to put Daenerys at ease, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she leaned back in her chair. For all her doubts, Varos's vision of a unified Essos, of an unassailable foundation for her eventual conquest of Westeros, carried a certain undeniable logic. As the meeting continued, Varos outlined the next steps for their campaign, ensuring every detail was meticulously planned. The court's confidence in his leadership grew, and the room buzzed with anticipation for the battles ahead. But even as they plotted their grand ambitions, the absence of Jon Snow was a quiet reminder that not all shared Varos's fervor. For now, he was kept in the dark, but the time would come when the truth of their plans would reach him. And when that time came, the fragile balance within Daenerys's camp might face its greatest test.